Hello, if you've been here before, welcome back. If you've seen this video series before or want to head straight to the video content, go to the timecode below. If it's your first time here, hi, my name is David. I make videos talking about media that I want to talk about. This is the next entry into my Fear Entity Exploration video series where I analyze the dread powers within the Magnus Archives, which is a horror podcast created by Johnny Sims and Alexander J. Newell for the Rusty Quill production company. I will be analyzing 3 episodes that focus on a specific entity, and using those episodes, its contents, and their connections to the grander story to explore the entity and how it's used within the show. I have chosen these episodes based on my rankings of every season of the Magnus Archives, and I have a playlist with those ranking videos if you so desire to be familiar with my opinions. This is a heavy spoiler warning for the entirety of the Magnus Archives, as I will be discussing these episodes with the full knowledge of all 200 episodes. You have been warned. Enjoy.
Isolation. Smirk called it the lonely. The feeling that you're just alone. Maybe there's no one else there at all, maybe you just can't connect.
The fear of isolation. Being alone. Being forgotten. Being forsaken. The fear that you will never again speak to another human being. The fear that humanity has moved on from you. The fear that you will no longer be a person, just an empty vessel. Solitude, abandonment, and seclusion. That was just for dramatic effect, because of the cold. Anyways, loneliness is a prescient topic nowadays, especially after a certain world event where we had to seclude ourselves. Society disconnected from each other was a horrible thing for the world, and people would risk themselves just to be with others. There's a concept of cuffing season, where people are more open to starting and sustaining long-term romantic relationships set during the winter, which pulls from our want for warmth. We all fear the first day of a new school or job where we are new and don't know anyone. But wanting connection with others has always been a human need, something that drives us to live, to love, and to cherish one another. It's a very human thing to want to be with one another, that we have filled our history with stories of lost loves, actions that lead to exile, and sometimes the impossible event of being the only one left alive in the world. This idea is that one of the worst things that can happen to you is to be alone. We're getting a little personal here. I'm very glad to have met my partner. If you've watched other videos of me, I've talked a lot about Matthew and how happy I am, and this is part of my fear of being alone. Sure, I was young, but I used to be so afraid I'd never find someone to relate to love, and that fear was both paralyzing and galvanizing, both not knowing how to proceed, but pushing along despite everything. I am no longer afraid of being alone because I have Matthew, but now there are moments where I am alone physically, and I feel that fear of what would happen in the event. I won't say this is getting too personal here, but I know the fear of the lonely very well. The lonely is strong, though. A number of people find comfort in being alone after being hurt by others. Hell is other people. But, fear is subjective. Out of most other fears, the lonely is one of the most seductive. There's a sort of comfort within it, this idea of an unchanged state. Protection from danger from others, protection from getting your heart broken. I can see sometimes why people would want to be alone. Within the Magnus Archives, the lonely holds an important spot, being connected to one of the main characters of the show, Martin, and one of the latter antagonists, Peter Lucas. The lonely rears its head more within the last 2 seasons of the show, not becoming a prominent antagonistic force, but being an important piece in the character story arcs and the plot. Per my count, there are 10 episodes, with statements or events that solely feature elements, aspects, or avatars of the lonely, not counting overlapping episodes. Along with other small moments of the lonely and the inclusion of Peter Lucas, the lonely is one of the better paced dread powers in the show. In fact, there are only 2 lonely focused episodes per season. Per my count, there are no other Dread powers with that exact of a spread. I think the writing for The Lonely is tight and perfect for what it accomplishes in the story. The Lonely has time to grow. Sometimes it expands the Lucas family storyline, and other times it explores other isolated stories. These different branches hold up on their own and are an example of great world building. It shows this cult like connection, as other fears tend to have, concurrent with unrelated events that are as engaging as the Lucas family, making the Dread Power feel more vibrant in its depictions. And I'll say, with how simple The Lonely is, it manages to make many interesting and terrifying ideas that feel distinct from one another. It feels like it's easy to accidentally make Lonely episodes very similar, but because of its simplicity, Johnny Sims' writer had to write these episodes with something to stand out, which aids the Dread Power overall. It's well paced, as I said, and it can stack these multiple building blocks slowly as the story progresses, sometimes appearing in cameos and other episodes, incrementally creating this picture of the fear. Peter Lucas is a main factor in this, as the story also has to set him up as a main antagonist for season 4. What The Lonely was able to accomplish in the show is very well written and very well established. What I want to do is to look at the 3 episodes I've chosen about The Lonely and use them to explore the things I like about the Dread Power and the individual successes of the episodes. As I said before, I'm making this series in ascending order from the entities I at least like to most like, so of 15, The Lonely is number 8. We are in the middle of this series. Congratulations! I will let y'all guess which of the Dread Fears are my top 3. Now, for The Lonely, the 3 episodes I've chosen are 13 Alone, 57 Personal Space, and 150 Cul-de-Sac.
To be honest, I'm not even sure I should be here. What happened was weird, and alright, I can't think of a rational explanation for it, but I was distraught. I still am. I should go. I probably just imagined the whole thing. He's gone, and that's all there is to it.
That's certainly possible. It might all be in your head. Though there is the matter of the stone.
Case number 0161301, statement of Naomi Hearn regarding the events following the funeral of her fiancé, Evan Lucas, released April 20th, 2016. Brief summary of the episode. John speaks with Naomi Hearn, who's hesitant on telling her tale, especially to the old tape recorder. She begins with talking about how she met her fiancé, Evan Lucas, and started an easy relationship with him. He dies suddenly from heart defects, and his family takes care of the funeral. Naomi goes to it, but the Lucas family is not welcoming to her, and as she leaves the mansion, she loses control of her car and crashes, finding herself stranded on the side of the road without signal. She begins walking, feeling an oppressive fog around her until she arrives at a cemetery and a chapel. She notices the graves are dug up completely empty and feels afraid of the strange circumstances. The chapel door opens and she sees a wide field that she knows she would be alone in forever, and she flees. She hears the voice of Evan guiding her and she manages to escape, getting hit by a car soon after. John tells her that her trauma from Evan's death may have caused hallucinations, which makes her storm out. And the only evidence of her experience is a broken piece of grave marker that reads Forgotten, that John sends to artifact storage. Out of however many episodes I've done so far for this series, this is probably the earliest episode I'm going to cover. Most of season 1 is just setting up what the fears will be, along with the avatars and recurring characters that will appear in future episodes. To me, these episodes are good, but as Johnny Sims continues, the writing gets sharper and better. So those I tend to want to talk about more. However, for The Lonely, this episode is a great introductory episode. We are still in the stage of planting the seeds, and this is a potent one at that. It's an episode of firsts. The first Lonely episode, the first mention of the Lucas family, and the first voiced character besides John himself, not even any of the Institute office staff, another person. Naomi Hearn, voiced by Katie Davison, makes the anthology format more present, as it briefly stops being John reading ghost stories and now becomes someone recounting an event to him. It feels like the fears are closer than they seem. This episode succeeds in its atmosphere. There aren't any clever writing techniques, there's no complex imagery, it's not heavily plot relevant. What this episode has is simplicity and subtlety. I got that on the first try. To fully introduce the lonely, it has to feel menacing and imposing, and this episode manages that, accomplishes that. First, some housekeeping. We begin with Naomi complaining about the tape recorder, how old it looks, and John mentions how trying to record digitally failed, calling back to episode 1 Anglerfish, where he notes how some statements seem to refuse being recorded digitally, resulting in significant audio distortions. This, of course, is the web / Anvil Kane / any other web avatar that is influencing them, forcing John to record actual real stories on the tapes. It's the framing device of the show, how every single thing we hear is real in their world. I forget where it is, but in a Q&A, Alexander Daniel promises that every single thing we hear on the episodes is real. There will never be a fake story. Naomi says that she can see why people don't take the Institute seriously with this archaic device, but says that no one else would believe her. She begins to rationalize it all, saying it was all in her mind, but John brings up the stone, which is harder to explain away. She finally agrees, and John stands to give her some privacy, some space, but she asks him to stay, not wanting to be alone after her ordeal. She begins her statement. Naomi describes her upbringing and then meeting Evan Lucas, setting up her solitary persona, never being noticed in school, having lost her father to death and her mother to work, living alone during college. Naomi lays out how comfortable she is with being alone, but still has some regrets about it. I did get a bit lonely sometimes. I'd hear laughter coming from other rooms in my building or see a group of friends talking in the sun outside, and maybe I'd wish I had something like that, but it never really bothered me. Like we've seen from other statement givers who have encountered the fears, Naomi has been courting this feeling all her life. She's primed herself to be a victim of the lonely by isolating herself from others. She says that her Pastor David, worried about her solitude, saying it was not normal for someone to be alone. He even worries that she would get lost, which she doesn't elaborate on. She meets Evan Lucas at a failed job interview and remarks on her failed relationships prior. In both cases, they said it was because they never really felt like I wanted them around, and looking back, that was kind of true. Again, Naomi courting the lonely. However, with Evan, it's much easier for her, and we'll soon learn the Lucas family is touched by the lonely, and while it seems Evan is estranged or turning away from his power, the power from his family, he is still connected to it. The way Naomi talks about it, it's almost like he gravitated to her because of her loneliness, mundane enough for a relationship, just enough of it to feel familiar to him, to feel manageable. Evan even helped Naomi have a social life, having friends of his own, and Naomi's life had become a bit brighter with him in it. She proposed to him, which great subversion, girl power, and was very, very happy with him, which is why Evan's death hit her hard. Losing him made her feel alone once more, but even worse now, with the knowledge of how it could be. I really like the voice acting of her delivering when he died.
I'll skip over the bit where he dies. It's only been a year, and I don't want to spend an hour crying into your crappy tape player. Congenital, they said. Some problem with his heart. Always been there, but never diagnosed. No warning. 1 in a million chance. Blah, blah, blah. He was gone, just gone, and I was alone again.
All prior, we learned that Naomi prefers to be alone and has chosen it. But when the choice was taken from her, when Evan died suddenly, she despaired. It's the choice that's important here, that she can be alone or be with someone if she so desires. The Lucas family, Evan's family, arranged the funeral, staged at the Lucas home in Kent, which Naomi sees is called Moorland House. In all future mentions of the Lucases, Moorland House is never mentioned again, nor does it show up online, so I assume it's a fictional location, the staging ground for the Lucas power. Either way, Naomi is invited, and when she arrives, she immediately clocks the atmosphere, with trees bending ominously over her. She mentions having driven in the rain and there being a large storm. In her grief-addled mind, it didn't register to her, so focused on the loss of Evan. And she begins to cry when she sees Moorland's cemetery, knowing that Evan will eventually be buried there. There's all so much grief around her, distracting her. Then, when she gets to Moorland House, the door opens for her, as if inviting her inside. It opens by itself. She briefly encounters Evan's father, who remains unnamed, and briskly tells her which direction the funeral is. The rest of the family is no better. Each wore the same hard expression as his father, and I might have been imagining it, but I could have sworn that when they looked at me, their eyes were full of something dark. She also clocks their power, their danger of being powered by the lonely. An interesting addition, none of them spoke to me or even each other, and the house was so quiet and still that at times it seemed like I could hardly breathe under the weight of the silence. We are beginning to establish the lonely's tone and motifs. Naomi is taken to Evan's open casket, saddened to see him in a suit for the first time and disturbed to see how stern he had looked. She compares her emotion here to the emotion she had in her father's funeral, not feeling a sense of closure. Suddenly, all of Evan's family glare at Naomi. She feels like she's standing between them and their prey, Evan's body. An older man tells her, "It's time for you to leave. The burial is a family affair. I'm sure you want to be alone." This, to me, seems like the moment they condemn her to the lonely. She flees the funeral in sadness, driving in the hard storm once more. Distracted, afraid, grieving, Naomi accidentally crashes her car, which begins her exploration on the lonely. Her phone no longer has service, so she abandons it, and the time in her car is also different, having arrived at Moreland at 6, but it's now 11 p.m. She lost 5 hours, stuck in confusion. She begins walking, getting soaked in the rain. The cold bit into my soaked funeral clothes, and I shivered, falling to my knees and just about giving up. It feels like the old Lucas man had sent her away, marked for the lonely, and her confusion and grief while driving, the crash, and losing 5 hours was all preparing her for more isolation. And when she reaches the pinnacle of despair, when she's about to give up, I believe this is the moment when she enters the lonely. Suddenly, the scenery changes. It has stopped raining, and now a heavy fog settles over her. Here, the fog becomes a strong recurring motif for the lonely. The fog seemed to follow me as I went and seemed to swirl around with a strange, deliberate motion. You'll probably think me an idiot, but it felt almost malicious. We see strong fog like this again during lonely episodes or lonely appearances, such as in 33 The Boatswain's Call, with the fog summoned by Peter Lucas's boatswain whistle, or in episode 50 in Magnus Protocol, Deep Trouble, when Warden Olivia is killed by a fog with teeth. I feel safe about talking about Protocol because that is set during in the archives world, and the fog with teeth, like, come on, it's the lonely there. Naomi says this fog made her feel utterly forsaken. She attempts to flee, going from tarmac to dirt, but the fog doesn't relent, the trees around her half hidden, almost like a Silent Hill video game. Naomi begins to fear when she realizes the ground she walks on isn't wet, despite the downpour that had happened just a bit ago. She says that she shouldn't have seen the fog. The night was cloudy and there are no lights, so it should have been very, very dark. Her being able to see the fog makes it sound supernatural. It wants to be seen. It wants her to think that she's stuck in a fog all alone. She stumbles upon the cemetery and the chapel, but can't open the door. The fog begins to feel oppressive, cloying, and heavy, and she needs to get inside. She decides to break a window and begins looking for a tool to do so. And she finds a chunk of rock broken off of a grave. When she bends to pick it up, she notices something is wrong. The grave is dug up, a perfect rectangle with an empty open coffin at the bottom. In fact, all the graves she sees are like that. Even here among the dead, I was alone. As her statement continues, we keep building and building incongruities. I also got that in the first try. In a way, it's as if the lonely is teasing her. From the visible fog to the empty church to the open graves, little pushes of knowledge of being forsaken, of being abandoned and alone. Then the fog begins to solidify. It tries to pull her into one of these open graves. She stumbles, falling, almost landing below, but her grasp on the broken stone helps her up, and she escapes the gentle push of the fog. She thinks of Evan's family and does not want them to be the last people she ever interacts with. The chapel door is open by itself. Again, a tease. And inside the chapel, instead of sanctuary, she sees a field. It was bathed in sickly moonlight, and the fog rolled close to the ground. It seemed to stretch for miles, and I knew that I could wander there for years and never meet another. Inside the chapel and outside the cemetery, the field traps her, the lonely, ready to claim her forever. It seems almost inviting. As she had so desperately wanted to go into the church, but also menacing like a trap. Whether inside the church or out in the field, you would be alone. Naomi chooses to flee, running from the chapel, pushing through the heavy fog. It was like I was running against the wind, except the air was completely still. I could hardly breathe as I inhaled it. Such a strong presence without any humanity, uncaring and hungry. And as she flees, she hears Evan's voice telling her to turn left. And she does, not understanding, but trusting her fiancé. There's been a building of tension, more things appearing, more signs, more confusion. And as Naomi flees into the field, hearing Evan's voice, we want to hear what happens next. A climax approaches. She says she kept running, and then nothing. And John asks if that's when she got hit by the car. It's a really fun break of tension, the opposite of a jump scare, I would say, which brings us out of this gothic emptiness towards Naomi and John Institute. She asks if John thinks it was all real, and he gives her half answers, alluding to his disbelief without saying it out loud. She gets frustrated, saying that she was wasting her time giving her statement here, and she gets cut off as the recording ends. John returns, summarizing the investigation. Evan's death from heart failure is public knowledge, while any information from the Lucas family is fully blocked. Naomi was hit by Michael Getty a few miles away from her stalled car. That's another Michael in the Magnus Archives. John says there aren't any cemeteries nearby that would match with Naomi's tale, and the storm that she had mentioned she drove through would have cleared away any fog that she encountered, but the only sense of evidence for all of it is the stone she used to pull herself up. A broken piece of a marker with the word forgotten written on it, implying the usual line for gone but not forgotten. Of course, given the circumstances, it might as well have been gone and forgotten. Or the stone was left there for her to find, but she didn't get a chance to read it, and maybe if she had read it, something bad may have happened. We don't know. I like the implications here. Repercussions from this episode. In 17, The Bone Turner's Tale, Elias warns John to not antagonize the Lucas family anymore, as they are donors to the Institute. Red tape, bureaucracy, and corruption, maybe? Anyways, Naomi Hearn also logged a formal complaint against John. Later in 120 Eye Contact, John's fall into being an eye avatar allowed him to see and visit the nightmares of those he's taking life statements from. Elias is narrating this, of course. Naomi being the first one that John ever took, Elias mentions that this dream is the oldest one. Naomi is stuck in a grave, calling out for help, begging to stop having this reoccurring nightmare. Naomi Hearn doesn't appear later after this. I didn't come up with this. This appeared in my research. Thank you to the Magnus Archives Wiki. In 111 Family Business, Jerry mentions how the Lucas family prepped their family members for the lonely. He and John mentioned that the Lucas family would kill any members who threatened their legacy, which alludes to Evan's death being planned by the Lucas family. Jerry also alludes to Naomi as one of the spooky singles that marry into the family, but could also mean Peter Lucas's mother that we learn about later in the show. It could be extrapolated that the family killed Evan, and that the family affair burial Naomi is told about that she needs to leave is some sort of ritual or something like that to send Evan into the lonely, which would explain his saving of Naomi. They obviously sent her there with the old man's words, "I'm sure you want to be alone," sort of in retaliation, or they just simply wanted to. They could just send this person away. There's something here I'm not fully grasping in terms of what happened to Evan and Naomi, but at least the story has concluded, which can't be said for other characters. Having set up the Lucas family in this episode, they are now becoming a recurring signal to the Lonely's appearance. Random appearances of other Lucas members I'll cover in the next episode, but for now I'll focus on Peter Lucas, or the beginnings of Peter Lucas, as he is the next Lucas to appear. 33, the boatswain's call has Peter Lucas manning the Tundra. John notes the similarities to Naomi's statement, but is hesitant to draw attention to the Lucas family after Eliza's warning. Peter Lucas later appears in 66 Held in Customs, having lost a bet to Michele Salesa that Vincent Yang wouldn't survive being trapped in the shipping container. A subtle setup that Peter Lucas is a gambler. In 100, I Guess You Had to Be There, he appears to talk with Elias but meets Brian Finlayson instead, who's panicking about spiders. Peter makes sure that Brian isn't working in the Institute and sends him into the Lonely just for shits and giggles. Probably didn't, he asked, do you work for the Institute, because he didn't want to antagonize Elias by hurting one of his staff. So a good day, I guess, for working there. The next main moment with Peter is in 108 monologue, where he interrupts Martin's recording of Adonis Biros getting lost to the stage. Elias had orchestrated them into meeting, setting up their relationship in season 4. Peter even asked Martin how Elias is as a boss, toying with the idea of replacing him. After that, Peter becomes the main antagonist of season 4, spearheading the Extinction storyline, as I covered in my last anti-expiration. Check that out if you so desire. And regarding his work in season 4, we'll touch on that later. Either way, the Lucases are set up with Naomi's statement, along with the Lonely's MO. Teasing, forced knowledge of being alone, a harsh family, and spooky singles, all within an early episode of the season, which helped lay the groundwork for the Lonely in the show moving forward.
There were 2 other people technically on the crew. I say technically as I never spent any time with them beyond the trip up to the Daedalus. Their names were Jan Kilbride and Manuela Dominguez. I'm sure that they probably did a lot more looking after the station than I ever did, but as far as I was concerned, I was the only one up there.
Case number 0090404, statement of Carter Chilcott regarding his time spent in isolation aboard the space station Daedalus in September 2007, released March 22nd, 2017. At times, I might accidentally say Charter Chilcott, so sorry if I do. Brief summary of this episode. Carter Chilcott delivers a terrifying message of humanity being alone in the universe and describes how he got involved in the Daedalus mission. He worked with Conrad Lucas, who was conducting an isolation study, which would have Carter in a sealed room separated from the other 2 astronauts in the space station. He had ample entertainment and a sealed code to open the heavy door, which he resolved not to use. Weeks pass, and in his isolation, he believes to experience hallucinations, but eventually realizes something is wrong when he sees an empty spacesuit floating across his window. He soon notices that he can't see Earth anymore. He begs to be released to the camera that monitors him, but he discovers that the camera was never working. He inputs the code on the door, but it will not open, and he begins to despair. He notices that his food and water keep replenishing, meaning someone is keeping him trapped, and starves himself to get out of the situation. He's brought back to Earth and treated for malnourishment, and thanks the Institute for hearing him out. John delivers his final comments, laying out the 3 groups that spearhead the Daedalus mission. In the supplemental, John's caught searching Sasha's desk, discovering nothing except for a stock photo-looking picture of not Sasha and her new boyfriend, Josh. I have in my script accidentally her new boyfriend, John. Very nondescript names, I will say. I had to talk about Daedalus. This is the first episode that introduces the little storyline, and I've already covered the last episode of the Daedalus, 135 Dark Matter, in my Dark Exploration, so check that out if you so want to. This is a fan favorite storyline, with the Daedalus being a somewhat absurd yet still terrifying foray into space. There has to be some suspension of disbelief, as such an undertaking would be extreme and slow going, but I do think that it fits in well with the world building of the Magnus Archives. There have been and will be harrowing events, highly publicized events, on par with the Daedalus. In Nine A Father's Love, we got the highly reported on murders of Robert Montauk. In 110 Creature Feature, we got the disappearance of 100 film actors and Dexter Banks, a prolific film director. In 121 Far Away, I have no doubt that a satellite taking out a boat of scientists would make national news. I'd argue that the Daedalus mission is just like any of those moments, an important moment of cultural history begun because of the fears. To the statement, Carter comes in swinging, delivering a sobering message. We are all alone out there. He describes the sense of isolation the Earth has to the rest of the universe, and how we are all deluding ourselves with hope for alien life. He says that when humanity ends, no one will care because there is no one. Take comfort in your escapist fantasies of aliens and visitors from other worlds, but there is no proof I can give you beyond the testimony of one who has spent so very long staring into the black and empty infinity and knowing, truly knowing, what it means to be floating and forsaken in an empty universe. As he'll mention later, he was sent up to space with Jan Kilbright and Manuela Dominguez. But before that, I want to note some parallels. Most of what Carter says rings familiar to what Jan Kilbright says in 106 A Matter of Perspective regarding his perspective. Even with all I've seen, I still can't communicate it. I can't make people actually understand how horribly, nauseatingly boundless this universe is. And when I think of it too deeply, I feel like I'm going to throw up, like a sort of existential vertigo. These episodes are separated by a season's worth of content, but it's interesting that they touch on similar themes. And it's not by accident. In 151 Big Picture, Simon Fairchild tells Martin, after all, the larger the space you find yourself alone in, the more isolated you feel. And Martin responds, and being aware of how lonely you are can make anywhere feel more empty. This synergy between the lonely and the vast is illustrated in the Dayless episodes, which helps make the episodes feel connected despite their distance, despite their isolation from one another. Carter talks about his aspirations, wanting to be an astronaut, waiting for the chance to go into ISS, but his application was in limbo. He was approached by a private consortium about conducting an isolation experiment in a privately owned small manned satellite. He agreed to do it and studied up on other isolation experiments. Like, in real life, I think he should not have been allowed to do this, as it might skew results, but, for the plot, for the story, it's important for the narrative of the statement. He was adamant that he would combat the side effects, or at least have the knowledge about them to face them. Even when he does realize he's not a crew member, but someone being tested on, he was so enthused to go to space he wouldn't have changed his mind. Like I said, he mentioned Jan Kilbright and Manuela Dominguez as the other crew, but he never actually met them. He knew that they each had their own experiments, not anything connected with his own, but at least they were there to pull him out, if in the case of emergency. Of course, as we will eventually learn, only Manuela was there with an intention to make the Dark Star for the Ritual of the Dark, while Jan was there similarly to Carter to be terrorized by the Vast. Carter mentions his point of contact in the mission, Conrad Lucas, which when I first listened to this show, to this episode, I heard Comrade. So that painted a slightly different tone to the story, hearing Comrade, but it's Conrad. And Conrad, he says, made a face of rather overstated disgust when he told me I wouldn't be up there entirely on my own. A little cartoonish, if you ask me, but aligned with the Lucases. Conrad tells Conrad tells Carter about his room, stocked with a food, a bed, and exercise equipment, and how the huge reinforced door that would sever him from the crew could be opened with a code in case of emergencies. He also highlights a singular, huge domed window out of which Carter could view Earth, because they're orbiting Earth. The room also had ample books and movies, so Carter would keep himself busy. Once in space, they sealed him in the room, and he was in good spirits. He was also told about a camera on the wall that the scientists would allegedly watch him and record data, and so he performed most of his tasks in full view of it. I try not to take too much comfort in the knowledge that there were people watching my every move, as I felt that to find that reassuring would go quite strongly against the spirit of the experiment. I had to really feel alone. One thing I am missing from The Lonely, one thing I don't really talk about in my script that I'm thinking of as I'm recording this, there is some interplay between The Lonely and the I. Peter mentions it in 159 The Last, but not much of it is explored, this interplay between The Lonely and the I. That's sort of something that I'm wanting to, missing from The Lonely, but I forgot to talk about it in my script, so I'm just saying it now. Carter also mentions the view from the window. He was told that Jan and Manuela were to avoid being seen if they had any spacewalks, and he could at least see Earth. I set the visual space here, the window's here. I'm gonna move it over here. So yeah, over here. The window is over here now when I talk about it. If anything, the silent rolling green and blue of the earth far below was another source of comfort, and the sure knowledge of the billions of other people making their way through life who had no idea what was right above their heads. Even if he couldn't see anyone close up, he at least knew that someone was watching and that the earth was just there. He says it took 6 weeks for the hallucinations to start. He knew that there might be hallucinations, having already gone through the side effects of listlessness and insomnia, as recorded by the isolation study he'd researched. He knew to expect them, but he didn't expect them to be so severe, as he puts them. Because of this, I am inclined to believe that they were real to a degree. He says that twice he heard the door open, loud enough to wake him from his sleep, and by day he could hear footsteps, something impossible in zero-gravity space. There was a 20-minute blackout where only the lights turned off that he doesn't know if he imagined or not. He didn't like them, he didn't like these hallucinations, but he at least expected them, so he wasn't heavily moved by them. Similar to what happened to Naomi, I believe these are small, subtle cues sent to him, teasing him about his isolation. The door opening to mock his imprisonment, footsteps incongruous with his current world that would fit right on Earth where he isn't, and lights not working as if he was stuck in an abandoned derelict. He might have hallucinated, but these are tantamount to what we already know the lonely to do. The next event is what sends him into more of a panic. Through the window, he sees a floating EVA suit slowly moving by. He begins to feel elation at seeing someone else, but soon he sees that it's empty. Similar to Naomi seeing the empty graves, this is the lonely showing Carter how alone he is. It helps spike his fear, creating peaks and bounds in his emotions, witnessing more and more signals of his abandonment. As the suit passes by, he realizes that the Earth is gone. If the station would have readjusted, shifted so his view was away, he would have felt it, should have felt it. That also is a fear of his, that maybe I didn't feel this movement. But no, it was just gone. He waited to see the sun come into view, hopefully having the ship rotated to see it, but it never appeared anywhere. It gives him the sense that he's drifted far, far away from Earth, from its sun. It makes him feel more alone. 2 days later, he resigns to that fact and decides to appeal to the camera. He begs at it, hoping someone will free him, but nothing ever happens. Following a terrifying hunch, he tracks the cords of the camera, reaching a neatly severed wire, indicating to him that he was never being monitored, never being recorded. This is also such a simple scare to execute, with no supernatural interference needed. The camera never worked, and they led him to believe it did. It also makes him question the entire study. How are they collecting data? What is this study supposed to be? He destroys the camera in anger and breaks out the code for the door, fed up with the study. He doesn't care anymore. He wants out. The code he reads out is E109GHT8, and I've been curious as to why this code is like that, and when I searched it up, Reddit user Apufisu had a theory that I think sort of holds up. They say that the E109 is like ELO9, with the 9 bridging with the GHT and an 8, all to make Elone, and then that's the first 9, N sound in 9, and then night, and the 8, an infinite symbol, which match up with the 3 sponsors of the data list. This is a little loose for me, but no one else has come up with a better explanation. Personally, I prefer the previous theory that Apufisu had set up, which is that E10 is E10, and then everything else follows with night infinity. It feels more eldritch to be Eton Night Infinity, but whatever. Either way, Carter inputs the code. He meticulously presses each button again and again, entering the code, but the door never opens. When he puts in the code, all that reads back to him is, "No one is coming." A chilling moment, as if the code never worked, just as the camera never did, and could also easily be programmed without supernatural means to just read back the message. Oh yeah, let's make him put in this code and it just reads out something else. That's terrifying. The hallucinations, the empty spacesuit, the missing sun and Earth are all supernatural, but the camera and the door are malicious human traps, real tricks on him. Trapped and alone, with the clock suddenly stopping, which could either be supernatural or mundane, Carter feels helpless. He believes he is stuck there for 3 to 6 months, but without the sun, without the clock, it's hard to gauge time. But that is based solely on my eating and sleeping patterns, which are largely fueled by despair and that quiet aching terror of being utterly forsaken. He couldn't consume any media, for it began to feel lifeless. His reality begins to fracture, no longer hallucinating, but dreaming now. I'd be sleeping, strapped into my bed in the middle of the void, or at the same time floating through ancient graveyards or the open empty sea. They weren't hallucinations, though they were dreams, even if the cold did seem to seep out of them and into the bones of me. Graveyards, recalling Naomi's experiences, and again a connection with the vast, an empty sea frequently used with the vast. There's also a mention of the cold here, which I'm so sorry, I also forgot to mention in my script. Cold is used a lot in Lonely episodes, but the episodes that I talked about briefly touch on the cold, but I wish there was more of that so I could talk about that too as well. He then realizes something equally as horrifying yet different in its framing. His food and water should have depleted by then. However, he seemed never to run out, as if somebody was constantly resupplying him. The fears don't want to kill you, they want to make you afraid. If you're dead, you're not afraid. So, whatever malevolent being, Lucas or otherwise, that was keeping him here, somehow they were supplying him with food and water. They wanted to keep him alive. Because of this, he grew a little crazy, believing he died and gone to hell. That's fun. And this limbo space he was in is incongruous with his reality, so he reasoned that this is what happened. So, because of this, he decides to starve himself. When I finally faded from consciousness for what I hoped was the last time, it was the greatest relief I have ever felt. Many statement givers survive their ordeal by turning away from the fear. Some refuse to feel afraid anymore, such as in 71 Underground, when Carolina Gorka laid down and tried to sleep, escaping the crushing train, or in 167 Curiosity, with Fiona Law fainting at any danger. Some turned to death for their escape, as Carter does here. In 51 High Pressure, it took getting hurt by a ragged piece of a sunken boat and the bends to save Antonia Haley from the abyssal zone. Some victims are stuck in their ordeal until they die, as evidenced in 33 Boatswain's Call when Sean Kelly's body was recovered 6 months after disappearing, suggesting his exile lasted that long. This idea will repeat in the next episode that I'm covering as well. Carter nearly dies from his starvation, but he was cognizant enough to feel the re-entry to Earth. He was brought back to life, told that Manuela and Jan had pulled him from his isolation. He's not pushing to know more, though, and hasn't tried contacting Conrad. He even got paid for his ordeal. Either way, he just needed to get his experience down on paper, and thanks the Institute for providing this release for him. John talks about the investigation, confirming the Daedalus' public launch in 2007 by Stratosphere Group, the corporation who ran the circus. Not much can be said, not the circus, not, I wrote that as a joke, the corporation running the circus, no, it's not, you know what I mean. It's not the stranger running the entire thing, whatever, sorry. Anyways, not much can be said about the launch itself, as the supposed studies are buried under bureaucracy, so no data can be pulled for the Institute. But John says Tim was able to see who funded the Stratosphere Group. Let's get the less important things out of the way. Pinnacle Airspace, owned by the Fairchild family, obviously has a connection to the Vast. Jan Kilbride mentions a Mr. Fairchild, supposedly, possibly, Simon himself, but it could be anybody. And in 151 Big Picture, Martin mentions the Daedalus to Simon, who says that it wasn't an attempt at a ritual, just a test into what could be a ritual, what could be the future. Optic Solutions Limited, which John says is a relatively benign-seeming company manufacturing specialist cameras for research and industrial application, or whatever that means. And he says their business address is listed as being in Nye Alessund, of course a stronghold for the dark, first mentioned in 25 Growing Dark, as cultists chanted its name. All of this to say, the People's Church of the Divine Host is all over this. We confirm in 135 Dark Matter that it was Maxwell Rayner who organized the Daedalus mission for Manuela. And finally, there was simply a large private investment by Nathaniel Lucas. This is where I talk about the other Lucas family members besides Peter. The Lucases are an organized family that worships the lonely. Naomi says Evan's family was heavily religious, and he wasn't, which reflects Peter Lucas's discussion of his family, how members of the family were groomed to worship and be powered by the lonely, and also feed the lonely as well. However, the family tree is a mess and hidden from us. Like half of it is hidden from us, so I'm not sure how different members are related to each other. It doesn't really matter. Conrad Lucas, Conrad. Do you hear the difference? Conrad also only appears in this episode, but Nathaniel Lucas is also mentioned. He's noted as owning Peter's ship, the Tundra, and owns Solus Shipping PLC, which doesn't crop up again. The next Lucas to be mentioned is Mordecai Lucas in 92 Nothing Beside Remains. Barnabas Bennett writes a letter to Jonah Magnus pleading for his help as he's offended Mordecai by not repaying a debt, and Mordecai has made it so Barnabas would slowly disappear from the world, no longer being able to see anybody. Elias says Barnabas's bones are somewhere in his office. In 159 The Last, Peter Lucas tells more about his family. His mother married into the family, one of those spooky singles who took the lonely better than his father. After having 5 children, his father had just withered away into nothing, and his unnamed mother kept all of her children isolated, rotating nannies to avoid any connection. Peter has 2 sisters who have disavowed the family, similar to Evan, though there's implication that they might reach the same fate as Evan as well. Peter names his other siblings, Aaron and Judith, who were very sociable, so his mother sent them away to distant family members. He toyed with the idea of her sending them into the lonely, but he doesn't believe she would do that. In all 4 siblings, Peter highlights different types of isolation, fear, and longing they would feel from their respective paths, still feeding the lonely in their own ways. Being isolated from their family, being rejected by their family, that sort of fear keeps going. Peter also mentions that he only sees his family during funerals, recalling these stern-faced Lucases Naomi met. This suggests even further how, in death, the Lucases do something with the bodies. The fun part is imagining what, because we are never told that. Overall, the Lucas family dots the story, both with Peter and with random appearances here and there, a distinct buoy of the lonely. No other fear has a dedicated family like this either. Family, not cult. So the flesh almost does, as seen in 72 Takeaway, with Tom Hann being the nephew of cannibal John Hamm, but the lineage stops there. And Jerry in 1-1 Family Business says that Mary Key wanted to start a dynasty like the Lucases, but Jerry nipped that in the bud in the end. The Fairchilds aren't even a real family, so they don't count. And maybe the Circus of the Other for the Stranger could be seen as a family, a found family, but one needs an identity to be grouped into an identity. So back to the episode, John concludes with saying that he can't look into the Lucases anymore. Can't, because they're funding the Institute. That's dangerous. The Season 2 supplemental follows a recording of John getting caught by not Sasha as he searches her desk. By this time, John's still paranoid about Gertrude's death and the tunnels. He clumsily uses the excuse of trying to find a document on the Hilltop Road cases, having asked her to follow up with the children, referencing future episode 59, Recluse, before he even records it. In Recluse, he doesn't even mention any follow-up from Sasha there. Not Sasha asks him to not skulk around her desk and to not be recorded. Later, in a different recording, he scolds himself for being sloppy within his investigation and brings to focus a picture he found of Sasha and her no boyfriend, Tom. Oh, it's Tom. Sorry, in my brief summary, I said Josh or John or something like that. It's Tom. It doesn't matter, it's a stranger. Anyways, he says that the picture looks wrong, like a stock photo. Obviously, this is a front, as Sasha is not Sasha, and also Tom is a stranger agent, possibly the driver in 61 Hard Shoulder, found along with Breakin and Hope. Fork found in kitchen, and the episode ends here. The Daedalus space mission is a really fun, engaging, terrifying moment in the story, with billions of dollars poured in to make one man feel afraid in space. Well, two men. The rest of the Daedalus storyline will continue throughout the show, as does the Lonely's appearances, culminating in Peter Lucas's plan in season 4. But one more manifestation of the Lonely occurs before that.
I marched up to a nearby front door, prepared to kick in the flimsy-looking wood, but trying the handle revealed it was unlocked. I don't know why I picked that house. It was exactly identical to all the others, and I've often wondered if there was anything that drew me to it. Perhaps I was just unlucky. Or perhaps there only ever was one house.
Case number 0140911, statement of Herman Gorgoli regarding his period trapped alone in a suburban area of Cheadle. Audio recorded by Jonathan Sims, the archivist. Released August 22nd, 2019. Brief summary of the episode. John begins reading Herman's statement, talking about his relationship with his husband, Alberto. He thought that they had a good relationship after moving into a suburban house. He finds his life and marriage stagnant and unsatisfying. 2 years living in the suburbs leads him to cheating on Alberto, ending the relationship and living alone, his friends pulling away from him after the scandal. Now alone, Herman had to return a family heirloom he accidentally took, and when driving to Alberto, he got lost. As night falls, he finds himself in a maze of suburban streets, the names all placeholders, and isn't able to escape from it. He begins climbing through backyards until he grows tired and walks into a random house. The television plays imitation commercials with unnerving actors, which leaves him rattled, and upstairs, he finds the body of Yetunde Uthman, a woman who killed herself after being trapped like him. He flees, finding himself next to his abandoned car, and hears his phone ringing. Alberto calls him to berate him about being late, and Herman returns to the real world. He and Alberto are trying again, but he vows never to return to the suburbs. He does some research on Yetunde and discovers that she disappeared a year ago without anybody noticing. John's final comments are about the Lonely and him feeling aimless when Melanie walks in to let him know that she's soft quitting. I have to be clear, I fought with myself about which episode to choose for the third one I wanted to cover. I chose this episode over the other in season 4 because while it's an isolated episode, isolated statement, not plot relevant, it still delivers a very interesting and distinct manifestation of the Lonely. While mid to late season 4 feels a little slow, these kinds of episodes help invigorate the story. While the plot is slowly progressing, we are bridging moments with immaculately written horror stories that don't complicate the story any further. Herman starts off with talking about how hard life can be, focusing on his bad decisions as he continues to grow as a human being. Sometimes he says he's grown wiser as he's grown older, but knows that's not always the case. He's been with his husband Alberto for 15 years, but both of them working from home and moving into a suburban home together put a strain on the relationship. Herman and Alberto are not the first queer characters within statements, not counting the main characters, obviously, and it's always fun to get queer characters in these stories. The horrors can happen to anybody. I guess a quick history on queer characters in statements in the Magnus archives. The first queer statement character was in 3 Across the Street, with Graham being gay. Who knows if not Graham is gay in any way. Since then, many statement givers and main characters are introduced or revealed to be gay, and notable to this discussion in 38 Lost and Found, Andre Romeo's husband David was taken by the homophobic vase, and people have pointed out that they have a marriage license. The statement takes place in 2012, but gay marriage was not legalized in the UK until 2014, which means that in this alternate universe, gay rights in the UK came a bit sooner. Herman doesn't mention how long he's been married to Alberto, only mentioning their relationship being 15 years old. If anything, with this statement taking place in 2014, they have been married at least 2 years, which does coincide with them moving into the new house, which would make sense for a change like that. But in the end, it does not matter. 15 years together, 15 years in gay years, that's like an eternity. Alberto's parents had sold them their second home in Cheadle, which Herman points out is not the suburb in Manchester, but the suburb in Stoke-on-Trent. Cheadle in Manchester, as of 2011, has a population of 15,000. Cheadle in Stoke-on-Trent, as of 2011, has a population of 12,000. Herman does not look at Cheadle favorably, hating the identical-looking houses and inoffensive gardens. I've never seen people happily living in a place so obviously dead. Living in suburbia doesn't sit well with Herman, and he lashes out by cheating on Alberto. His husband finds out, and in the fallout of the relationship, he moves out. He's ashamed to admit he felt relief leaving the suburbs, but finds himself isolated in Liverpool. Their friends sided with Alberto, obviously, and his attempts to socialize failed, with his age not mixing well with the gay scene. Herman's own decisions and actions have caused him to be isolated and alone, which primes him perfectly for an encounter with the lonely. He goes on to mention that in his flight from Alberto's, he accidentally took a carved wooden moose that Alberto's grandfather had made, which Herman hated to have displayed because it was so ugly. He uses the opportunity of returning the moose to Alberto to see him again, maybe wanting another fight to feel something or just to see him again. He begins driving when the sun is setting. He had mentioned prior about getting lost leaving the suburbs and now is getting lost returning. His GPS, or sat-nav I guess, isn't working properly, and he doesn't recognize any of the streets. Herman ends up pulling out a hand map, finding the street, Ash Tree Hill. I believe this is reference to House of Leaves, as the titular House of Leaves is on Ash Tree Lane. Sometime between getting lost, the sun setting, the GPS glitching, and the physical map unfolding, Herman finds himself in the lonely. I wish there was something that, set him there, like a signal or sign or something. It feels pretty random, but whatever. He goes down one road and tries to read the sign, but it just says road, a placeholder. The suffix of the name, like RD, I assume, and then he keeps seeing more of this. I really like how the voice acting and reading of the terms feels like the unique names of the streets have been redacted in the voice, as if John actually read out the true names, but the first part has been removed from the recording.
I pressed on, looking for more. Avenue. Close. Way. Lane.
That's a really cool technique and makes it feel a bit more supernatural. Night descends upon him and Herman gets fed up with trying to navigate. He decides to just leave, but gets even more lost, ending up taking multiple U-turns, turning into cul-de-sacs, and even ignoring one-way lanes. But somehow, he cannot get out of the suburbs. Eventually, he notices that he hasn't seen anybody on the road or walking on the sidewalk. He tries going to the houses, hoping to talk to someone for directions. Doorbells don't work, and his knocks go unanswered. There were no lights on behind the drawn curtains, and all the house numbers were 0. He notes how normal everything seemed, how nothing was abnormal, and eventually his gas runs out and his car slowly comes to a stop at another cul-de-sac. His car says it's 3 in the morning, and with his phone dead, he decides to hoof it on foot. He picks a single direction and just keeps moving, trying to stick to a straight line, climbing over fences, crossing the street, trying to reach the edge of the neighborhood. I don't know how long I went on like this, but it felt like hours. At the start, I was counting how many houses I passed, but when I got to 100, I stopped. It was beginning to eat away at my careful rationalizations, and I couldn't have that. I want to note, at this point, this statement feels very similar to the movie Vivarium. Like I mentioned, this episode came out in August of 2019, and Vivarium premiered in May of 2019 in independent film festivals, but it didn't get wide release in the UK and the US until March 2020. It's very interesting that 2 distinct different pieces of horror media land on similar aesthetic choices, but Vivarium and Cul-de-Sac take different paths in the themes presented. Vivarium is about a young couple who is lured to this fake suburb and forced to raise a strange child, and the title conjuring up the idea of an enclosure, and the movie starting with giving an explanation of cuckoo birds. So the strange child is a cuckoo bird. When I first listened to this episode, I thought it was Spiral, as Vivarium deals with madness and confusion, most of what the Spiral does. Herman gets tired and decides to go into a house whose door is unlocked, almost inviting. He's surprised to find how unsurprising the inside is, exactly as he expected it to be. This is where I learned that the UK also has IKEA. I don't know why that was surprising to me. Similar to Naomi and Carter before him, Herman keeps encountering things he expects, with signs from the lonely that he is alone. The door being unlocked means that the lonely want him to walk inside, wanted him to see the walls covered in stock photos, and to know that no one has ever lived here. He will never see someone else here. He rests on a almost comfortable chair, he says, his legs tired. My body was aching and my eyes were heavy, and I had the thought that maybe I should head up to the bedroom. In the back of my mind, though, I knew that it was a trap. I had somehow become convinced that if I went to sleep here, then I would never leave. To combat this, he turns on the television, and the images he sees are some of the strangest, most unnerving things I've heard in the Magnus archives, and that's saying something. First, he sees a cooking show with a woman poking and prodding a raw turkey. She talks in a language he can't recognize, almost English, but not quite. She won't look at the camera, and Herman thinks there's something wrong with her eyes, but he can't see them clearly. She tears off a piece of turkey, tossing it over her shoulder, and keeps pretending to cook it. The next channel has a shopping channel. A tall, nondescript man, still not looking at the camera, trying to sell a brick in the same non-English. There's big text in English that reads, "Buy now only." No phone number or prices there to be able to buy this brick. Herman says it feels hypnotic. These images are so odd and also somewhat lends itself to the stranger. Most manifestations of the fears are pretty simple or straightforward. People getting trapped in places, lost in dangerous locations, terrorized by avatars or monsters. There isn't this added element of pantomime in the statements. However, this television pantomime echoes his reluctance to live in the suburbs. He says about living alone in Liverpool, "It was miserable. But every time I thought about going back, I felt nauseous. The idea of returning to those eggshell walls that we never got around to repainting, and the living room that expected me to sit there and watch Midsummer Murders until I passed away peacefully in my sleep. It made me want to throw up." It's almost like this place is conforming itself to Herman's fear, similar to domains witnessed in the apocalypse in season 5. The show is hypnotic. The chair was almost comfortable. The lonely wants to keep him here. Herman tries to think, leaning back, and he sees on the roof, on the ceiling, a red stain. He tracks it upstairs to find Yetunde Uthman, a young woman with her face through the mirror on a dressing table. With her name and detail of being conservatively dressed, it's implied she's African or Middle Eastern, maybe Muslim, likely an immigrant. The mirror shards cut into her jugular, leaving a large blood stain on the floor. Herman thinks it's recent, but cannot be sure. He runs from the house scared, seeing his own future reflected in the mirror shards embedded in Yetunde's neck. "I was going to die. I knew that now, just as she had, just as anyone else who came here had. How many corpses lay waiting behind the placid facade of this endless false suburbia?" Dream logic. Despite having traveled for hours in a straight line, he finds himself close to his abandoned car. And inside, his phone is ringing, apparently revived. It's Alberto, who calls him, angry for being late, but all Herman feels is relief, sobbing out, "I love you," to Alberto. It's enough, and Herman is free of the lonely. It took him when he was at his lowest. No friends, no love life, lost in the suburbs, and it took one person to remember him, and a promise of more, to no longer be alone. He looks up and sees the street lit up with signs of life and a woman approaching to see if he needs help. Finishing up the statement, he says he and Alberto are trying to work through their relationship again, but Herman's adamant about not returning to the suburbs, traumatized from his experience. He also did John's work for him, saying he looked up Yetunde himself. He found some social media, but no family or friends to contact. As far as I can tell, she disappeared a year ago, and nobody noticed. This further implies that Yetunde's been in the suburb domain for a year, and just now killed herself. Similar to Sean Kelly in the boat, similar to all the people that just disappear. They're still alive there until they kill themselves or starve. I'm not prepared to talk about this topic, but there is something to be said about the isolation some immigrants face going to a new country, that being the UK or the US or any other first world country. We don't know if Yetunde was born in the UK or immigrated there, but there is an implication of that, and I believe Johnny Sims also felt like he wanted to mention it, but not elaborate on it, because it's not his kind of story to tell. But that is something that we are cognizant of, this sort of isolation that happens when you are an immigrant. I enjoy John's final comments, delivering an exacting description of the lonely. The lonely is possibly the most insidious of the powers, I believe. Certainly, it's the one that most delights in having you do its own work for it. Even the spiders seem to have a hard time matching it for sheer seductiveness. Time to yourself, self-care, putting yourself first, not being a burden on those you care about. Doesn't even need to tell you any lies, just waits for the lies you tell yourself. He mentions fearing what Peter Lucas is planning, and the description echoing in his fear for Martin. This episode, as I mentioned prior and in other exploration videos, comes in the middle of Martin and Peter's arc, with Peter mentoring Martin while he learns about the extinction. He wants Martin to be touched by the eye and the lonely before he attempts to use the panopticon to stop the extinction from emerging. Basira and John frequently warn Martin, and Martin himself pushes against accidentally working on a new ritual for the lonely for Peter. In 134 Time of Revelation, Peter tells Martin that it'll take decades or centuries to have another chance to make a lonely ritual. Here, Peter calls the lonely Forsaken, giving it another name like Beholding. Throughout Season 4, Peter Lucas shows off some abilities he gets from the lonely, including being invisible and sending people away, which we've also saw earlier in Season 3. Martin also begins having some abilities as well, as shown in the episode prior, 149 Concrete Jungle, when Georgie and him argue over John. Martin makes himself disappear and makes Georgie forget who she was talking to. Peter's influence on Martin is growing. The next episode, 151 Big Picture, Simon Fairchild unsuccessfully answers some of Martin's questions, naming Peter's patron as the One Alone. He also notes that Peter's tendency as a lonely avatar to isolate correlates with his dislike to communicate or connect, which is why he likes doing wagers. It allows him a framework for cooperation that doesn't risk any sort of intimacy. Where's the statement where a gambler encounters the lonely? Come on. It all reaches a peak in 158 The Panopticon when Martin reveals to Peter and Elias that he was never fooled by the extinction fear-mongering. Elias gloats to Peter about losing his wager, and as Martin demands to be told what is happening, Peter sends him into the lonely. In 159 The Last, John follows Martin in, fulfilling Jonah's plan for John to be marked for the lonely through Peter's involvement. There, John forces a statement from Peter, learning about his upbringing and his plans, which we've talked about before. He reveals that Elias had a wager with him that if he could convince Martin to willingly pledge himself to the lonely, he'd have the Institute to himself to be able to use the Panopticon. He also describes the ritual for the lonely. Yay, I get to talk about the rituals! Out of the 12 rituals that we have learned about, Web and Corruption and Extinction don't have rituals, and the Stranger gets 2. I would rank the Silence at number 4. I'll touch on the rituals for the respective fears that I'm talking about, so I'll share their rank when I get to them. I really like the execution of the Silence, with a single tower block built by Peter Lucas, stocked with the newly moved, graduates with intense and high-stress jobs, and recent divorcees very much like Herman, and he would trap them without any internet or access to the outside, concentrating the fear of the lonely and hopefully bringing it into our reality. I think this idea is cool, but it doesn't really feel like a Peter Lucas thing. Someone who's been associated with sailing and open empty spaces rather than the city. The way Gertrude disrupts it is really funny as well, which was by tipping off a newspaper that made an article about the loneliest building in Britain. thus bringing in more attention and community outreach programs that solved the loneliness epidemic Peter was trying to create. With how often Peter appeared, I wish there was more build-up to this beyond his anger about Gertrude disrupting the ritual. He would mention his anger about Gertrude disrupting the ritual, but never really described it or talked about it. But at least it's fun and imaginatively horrifying. It also, like I said, it just doesn't feel like Peter to do something like this. Maybe like a boat. Maybe, I don't know. But it's still really fun. I really like it. Number 4. I return now to Cul-de-Sac, the episode. I'm sorry for going on a tangent. John iPowers knows that Melanie approaches and lets her in, where she tells him that she's no longer going to do any work. He thinks that she's trying to quit. He tells her that she can't quit, as we see in 90 Bodybuilder, where Tim got sick by being away from the Institute while being on vacation in Malaysia. Melanie just wanted to cold quit, also not wanting to contribute to the horrors perpetrated by the Institute. John pushes back, saying that they're doing good work like stopping the unknowing, and while Melanie concedes that this was a good thing to do, she does say that they did it as agents of the eye, not neutral or good parties. She even begins to question the issue with the rituals. You ever think that maybe this whole ritual business is just an excuse that we're all part of some huge, miserable fear machine? She does not want to participate in this cycle. She notes that working with her therapist helped her realize this. She doesn't know the details, just that I'm in a bad contract situation working somewhere pretty awful. She thinks I work for the Tories being the Conservative Party in the UK. John questions if the therapist is real, warning that the web can be subtle, and she fights against this, that she isn't stupid, and she has found a perfectly normal therapist. And it was very hard to do that as well, with her paranoia. She tells John that for all they know, maybe the web wants to paralyze them with indecision, so it's best to just stop thinking about the web at all. In the end, she says that she's going to try to get Daisy drunk while on the clock, which John suddenly knows, iPower knows, Daisy's only gotten drunk once in 2006, blurting out this information unasked for, another sign of his powers growing. Melanie ignores him, and she leaves. The episode ends. Like I said, this episode is sandwiched between 2 important plot episodes and does a great job delivering a different manifestation of the lonely, one unconnected to any Lucases, one wholly original and unique. The lonely and Peter storyline ends at the end of the season, marking the end of the beginning for Jonah's plan. I'm going to return to the cold motif. Final comments. These 3 episodes I like for different reasons. 13 alone sets up the Lucas family. Naomi Hearn is an iconic character, and it shows how the lonely teases you in terrifying ways. 57 Personal Space begins the Daedalus space station story arc and shows how powerful some antagonists can be, along with some very evocative imagery. Also, it's in space, like hello. 150 Cul-de-Sac is a great isolated statement in Season 4 that further fleshes out the lonely, along with showcasing some of the most compelling concepts in the show. I would rank these episodes from best to least best, 57, 13, 150. Overall, I find that The Lonely is well-paced and well-balanced throughout the show, with some standouts here and there. The Lucas family, and especially Peter Lucas, shoulder most of the burden for The Lonely's representation, but there are still isolated episodes that are great forays into The Lonely. By dint of its themes, it makes sense why there are some less diverse manifestations of The Lonely. Most of it is pretty similar, but it all works, and the special parts in each of those episodes help those episodes stand out. It does take some time for The Lonely to feel like a major player, as it comes in Season 4, but the build-up it has while other fears take the spotlight is very tight, unobtrusive, while still being unforgettable. As Peter and Martin's storyline comes to the forefront, all the work done prior for the fear pays off well. I don't have that many gripes about The Lonely. Similar to The Web, The Lonely doesn't reach the heights of terror that the other Dread Powers do, but its slow, subtle, seductive nature serves it well. Like I said, I do want a little bit more about how the cold features into this, into The Lonely, and maybe some interplay with the eye as well. Limitations beget creativity, and trying to fit a horror story into the themes of The Lonely creates some amazing statements for us to consume. Of the other episodes of The Lonely, 108 Monologue and Adonis Biros is a fun subversion in the middle of Stranger-focused Season 3, because Martin is like, this is something about a show, right? But it's not, it's The Lonely. That was fun. And the concept of doing what you love turning into a nightmare is so juicy. 92, Nothing Beside Remains, has brief Mordecai Lucas and Barnabas Bennett toxic doomed Yowie, and then the majority of the episode is plot relevant and lore dumping information. Important to the show, yes, but needs more Lonely rep. But that technically is an episode focused on Lonely because most of the rest of the information is not focused on anything else beyond just the story. So that's a Lonely episode. 33, Boatswain's Call, which I've mentioned many times prior, is Peter's first appearance and is full of odd things that really help build tension, along with Kelly's disappearance and death not coinciding, being a chilling revelation. I wish we got more from Peter, though, like himself in that, but 48, Lost in the Crowd, sticks out as unrelated to other Lonely episodes in good ways, along with Jerry Key being there, but ends up feeling a bit too divorced from the main story. It's a great concept, though. 159, The Last, is the episode that I was fighting with between this one and 150. I decided to go with an isolated episode because I didn't want to make it all Lucas-centered, you know? It's a fun dive into Peter's story, and John and Martin's relationship is growing here. But the voice acting, I love Alistair Stewart, but the voice acting here feels somewhat monotone and sometimes a slog to get through, and I tend to lose attention here. It is a point up, though, for having the silence. Now, okay, all those, good, they're good. All of them are good. The last two, no. 186, Quiet, has some fun voice acting and fun concepts, but I feel like we're retreading some character stuff that we've already touched on with Martin, so it feels like filler. And 170, Recollection, suffers from the season 5 writing, and I don't enjoy the repetitive nature. But I did like some of the humor here, you know, the retro, you know, that was fun. But either way, season 5 Lonely episodes. Obviously, these are mine own opinions, so I would love to hear what you think about The Lonely. Let me know why you like The Lonely, which episodes are your favorites, or what scares you about The Lonely. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear some feedback from y'all about my videos and my channel. Don't forget to be passionate, and I'll see you later.